that'd be a perfect little group. And, but then you can't pull them all at the same time because one's in PE or one's in music or one's out at recess. And I don't know if you ever tried to get a kid to come do math when they're at recess, it just doesn't go real well. And so scheduling is definitely a significant challenge, and that you're having to meet so many different goals with kids. And then the second thing is the paperwork piece. I know that when I first started, it definitely wasn't as significant. You know, you just kind of wrote your IEPs and they were pretty basic and you were done with it. Now it just seems that one, there's more areas of where kids qualify, like, you know, executive functioning and social emotional, or there's more kids with those types of qualifying areas where they didn't have that many before. And so writing those IEPs, holding those meetings, getting a hold of parents and teachers to schedule those meetings at the same time when you're trying to plan program for kids. And so it takes a significant amount of time. I don't know for Tammy, but you know, by far, I would say 30% of the time, 40% of the time can be spent on paperwork. And you either have to do that, you know, and when I say paperwork, I also mean meetings, because you're meeting with school psychologists, you're meeting with teachers, you're meeting with parents. So it's a significant amount of time where you're spending on that. So that's probably that's definitely one of the things that I am concerned about the most, because I want that time to do planning for quality instruction.
Well, Kian has asked a very important question. Kian wants to know, what is your favorite kind of cookie?
Chocolate chip, yeah. Thanks, appreciate that.
Okay, Emily wants to know, what made you want to work with special needs children, or we could word that as children with special needs. We've been talking about people first language. Like, was there a specific thing that made you want to work with students with special needs?
Yeah, I initially was going to school and I had a practicum. I thought I was going to go into counseling, and I volunteered as a practicum student at actually it was a self-contained school for special needs students, kids who had multiple disabilities. And so that was way back in the day when we used to do that kind of thing, where we had a school that was just for special needs students who have special needs. And so I started volunteering there, and I thought, wow, I kind of like this. And so I switched my degree as far as where I was moving toward, and started to pursue special education because of that one practicum.
Well, that's something that I think all of everyone tonight can be thinking about, is gaining that experience in schools. Some of you are already currently working in schools, like Nick and Michael, and I know some others of you as well. Yeah, so if you aren't, it sounds like getting experience makes a very big difference.
Yeah. And I'll just put a plug too. If you want to volunteer at Happy Valley, let me know.
There we go. I love that. Okay, so I will provide anybody who's interested, you can message me and I'll let you know how to get a hold of Bob. And of course, there would be background checks and all that kind of stuff that you'd need to do through the school district. But sometimes when you have an in, that makes a difference. So that's awesome. Allison wants to know, how do you manage all of the developmental differences in your room? She's picturing that at one time you would have different age groups of kids in your room. And so how do you manage that?
Yeah, so typically we're working with small groups, and it could be anywhere from 1 to 4 students, 1 to 5 students, maybe 5 students is for me anyway, as a larger group. Again, part of that's due to scheduling, where you just can't get them all at the same time. But the other piece is really looking at, you know, what are their goal areas and who has those similar goals, and then grouping them into those groups with kids with those similar goals. So they all are in a somewhat similar place, developmentally or certainly academically. And then, so that's one piece. Then the other is we're trying to do some push into classrooms. So we do both pulling out of the classroom and inclusion, trying to push into the classrooms. And honestly, this year, that's been pretty difficult because I'm often getting a text, hey, need help in so-and-so's room because so-and-so is dysregulated and I need to go help with that particular student. But we're really working to try to do that inclusion piece where we're helping kids within the classroom, and then we're pulling kids out based on their ability for a particular area. And I just, to have, at least for me, and Tammy can answer this for herself, is to have several different things going on at the same time in the room with kids right now, for me, isn't real manageable to make work. And the idea behind an individualized education plan is that we're giving kids individualized education. And I could pull out and have two different things going on at the same time, but the reality would be one of those groups is not going to get much time, or both of them are not going to get quality time because I'm going back and forth between them. There's just a lot of needs. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Carrie Ann has a great question. What was something that you wish you had more information about, or something you wished you had been more familiar with before entering the field of special education?
Boy, so that's going back a few years here. Yeah.
Or maybe
yeah.
even think of it in this way, Bob, like think of like anybody that would be entering the field, what would be something that you would say, man, you got to make sure you know about this?
Yeah, I think again, the IEP work, you kind of learn along the way. I'm not sure, even at Western, you fully get an understanding of how to write those IEPs. And there's lots of different aspects of the IEP. You're writing goals, but you're also writing things that are behavior plans. And I think probably one of the big pieces now is, because there are a lot of kids with behavior issues or social emotional issues, is the whole, how do we determine what's causing the behavior? And so there's something called an ABC observation form, which looks at antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And so kind of understanding some of how to set up a behavior plan would be good if you can find some more information on that and do some study on that, and kind of look at how do you identify, what is causing the behavior by going through some observations, and then that develops into a behavior plan. I think that's one thing. So that paperwork piece is not just the IEP goals, but also some other things. One would be like a behavior plan. I think another thing that I think is important is, there's not a one size fits all. So let's say a student has a reading goal, and we want them to be able to improve 1 year's growth in 1 year's amount of time. What that looks like for kid A might be a highly intensive phonics program, maybe something called Barton. What that looks like for kid B, who maybe is the same age and is maybe at the same level of reading or close, maybe they don't need that intensive phonics program. Maybe they need something more, just working on some fluency pieces for them where they've got some of the decoding skills. So just because kids are maybe around the same place, they may not need the same intervention. So I think having in your pocket a multitude of things in your toolbox, where you can pull out of that toolbox and say, I'm going to use this with this group of kids, and I'm going to use this with this group of kids, I think is something real critical to study up on and learn on those different pieces. And colleagues are great for finding out, hey, what are you doing? What are you using? And that kind of thing. But I think early on, I kind of got into this. Okay, I'm going to use, I don't know, DISTAR. That word is still out there even. I'm going to use DISTAR with everybody. And, you know, that wasn't necessarily the best approach. So different kids need different things.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That, yeah, colleagues is a great bit of advice there. Audrey says,
Oh, and
yes,
take your
go ahead.
lunch break.
Yes.
Tammy, do you get a lunch break? See,
Yeah.
special ed teachers notoriously don't get their lunch breaks because they're having to deal with kids, but got to draw some boundaries somewhere. Take lunch every
Yeah.
once in a while anyway.
Yeah, that's good advice. Personal care. Do you think it takes a certain type of person, this is Audrey asking, to teach children with special needs compared to a regular classroom teacher? Do you feel like there is maybe something unique about people that choose to go into something that drives them or makes them passionate about teaching?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a difference, but I think I know some of the characteristics that would be important for someone teaching students who have special needs. And one would be a patience and an empathy, and a deep empathy, I think, where you really can walk in the shoes of that student, and not only walk in the shoes of that student, but walk in the shoes of the parents. You know, so often it's easy for us to look at parents and we maybe think about them based on, like, I could have the, you know, maybe I could look at a parent and say, oh, this parent should be doing this, this, and this. And I'm looking at them based upon my experience, the privilege that I've had, the background that I've had. And so I think really having that empathy piece, not just for the students, but for the parents, and an understanding and support for the parents. It's hard. You know, it's hard for, say, even like, you know, a single parent mom or dad to have to figure out how to best support a child who has some special needs. And then to also, if some of the parents, you know, are in a place where they're have limited means and resources, is they're just trying to get by the day sometimes, and they're having a hard time getting by. And they might have some, you know, I see this often too, they may have some special needs or some difficulties. Like, for example, we're trying, this one student who we have, we're trying to set up a plan where the parents can be communicating with the school, and we can be communicating with the parent to help their child, again, who has some social emotional needs. And so we've set up just a real simple communication system where we have 3 areas, and there'll either just be a plus or a minus that goes home in it. And just want the mom to look at that and maybe spend 60 seconds or a minute with their child to see how the day went. So just that this child knows that the mom and the school are communicating. And the mom said, I don't think I can do it. I'm so scattered, and I don't think I can do it, you know. And I'm sitting there, ooh, I just want to say, you've got to do it. This is your child, kind of thing. And the mom, you know, has not done it yet. And so, as you know, from my perspective, I can look at that and be pretty judgmental and say, well, this has got to happen, but that's not going to help that situation. But if I can come alongside that parent and try to support them, you know, I found through the years is the whole adage, I guess, is that, you know, honey is the thing that catches the fly, and you know, you can try to be, I don't know, try to hold them accountable, and that's not my job, is to hold parents accountable. And so really trying to come alongside them with empathy and care, I think, is important. So that would be another, I guess that would be a quality, is just that deep empathy. And then flexibility, huge amount of flexibility is really important. You know, if you're someone who likes your I's dotted all the time and the T's crossed all the time, working is actually just working in education will probably drive you nuts, particularly these days, because it's not that way anymore. It requires a lot of flexibility, but
So true, so true.
yeah.
Carly's wondering about what was the toughest challenge, or what has been the toughest challenge for being a teacher during the pandemic. And you've already talked about some of the effect that you've seen with students, but maybe part of what you want to address there is like, what was it like working as a special educator when you were working with students remotely? I'm
Yeah.
guessing that was very challenging.
Sure. Yeah, so that came out, we were on March, whatever it was, 2020, we were said, we're going home. And then we had to figure out what we were going to do. And so the challenge there was to work with kids and find different platforms by which to do that. And so the first phase of that was, how are we going to do this? And learning the technology piece behind it and learning different programs that were successful. And so that took, I don't know, a month and a half to kind of feel comfortable with that. So I'm not only myself, but training my paraeducators, because they were working with kids too online. So working with that was the first kind of challenge. Then secondly, was figuring out how to help the kids show up. Some kids showed up, and some kids rarely to never showed up. And so, contacting parents, trying to connect with the students and that type of thing was a challenge. And then I think thirdly was, how can we help support kids in their general education classroom, which was being delivered, via remote as well. And so we tried to put together some accommodations for each class. And we knew what the general education classroom teachers were doing, so we would provide different accommodations. And that was probably minimally successful, but we made an attempt of it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then the challenge this year is just, how do we learn to work with kids who are significantly dysregulated, and putting together systems for them, and language, how do we approach them? How do we structure their day? Yeah.
Wonderful. Kian has another question besides the cookie question.
Oh,
he wants to know, what are some specific ways that you help children regulate and cope with their emotions in an elementary special education program? And I'm just going to share one little thing I just witnessed today with a teacher. And so she was working with a student, and she had him start rubbing his hand. And so first of all, that kind of brought his attention to the hand. And then as he went up the thumb, he breathed in. And as he went down the thumb, he breathed out. And then he did that with each finger. And so he's getting the sensation with the finger, but then he's also doing the deep breathing. And it was just so calming. And then she was doing it with him, which also obviously made a huge difference. She just didn't send him off to do it, but they did it together, and so powerful. But what are some little tricks, and maybe also certain resources, maybe a website or a book or a certain training that maybe you recommend as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a few things that there's some programs, and then there's some individual things, and then there's preventative. And I think first to look at, how can we be preventative with the kids? And so really looking at, what are the triggers? What is triggering this particular child? And so one, identifying those triggers is really critical. And then trying to mitigate those triggers and trying to eliminate some of those triggers for kids. So that would be one, those triggers in. And another one would be in the preventative area is giving them a soft start. If they come from home and they start right away with some academic tasks in their classroom, that comes back to a trigger. It could just cause them to dysregulate fairly quickly. So it might look like spending some time with a counselor or with a special education teacher, doing some calming activities, which could be coloring. It could be going to the motor room and doing some swing activities. it could be going for a walk. I've got a kid who loves outdoors and he likes to look for bugs and critters and that kind of thing. And so again, individualized to the child. So those preventative type pieces. And then another one just in the area of curriculum is something called everyday speech, which is it was originally made for speech and language teachers, but I use it a fair amount, and a lot of the teachers in the district use it. And it has kids who are actors, and they act out all kinds of different social emotional scenarios for kids. So one of those would be self-regulation. What happens to my body when I, what does my body feel like when I get upset? And then, kind of teaching that piece of it. And it goes through the videos, and the kids are acting this out. And then, okay, when I get upset, what are some ways that I can do, some calming? And there's lots of breathing activities like Roxanne pointed out. And I love the hand one. I've not seen that before, particularly you just start rubbing.
I know, isn't that neat?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to try that. And then, there's all kinds of different ones, like something called box breathing or figure 8 breathing, and smell the candle or smell the flower and blow out the candle. So there's lots of different breathing activities like that. We have a motor room as well, where we will take kids to the motor room, and there's lots of movement activities that can help to calm kids as well. There is another curriculum that we use throughout our school. It's called the Zones of Regulation. Has anybody ever heard of that? Zones of Regulation, yeah. So it just helps kids identify, where they are. And there's the red zone, the blue zone, the yellow zone, and the green zone. And the green zone is where you're getting ready for learning. The yellow zone, I've got some wigglies. I'm kind of maybe anxious. The blue zone is I'm kind of sad. The red zone is I'm out of control, kind of thing. And so then different strategies for each, there's different strategies for each one of those. It could be a fidget, it could be a lot of kids like really soft, like a stuffed animal type of a thing that's really, really soft, or some kids like weighted blankets. Some kids like to jump and get their energy out that way. And so do some of those things. Clay is another thing I find that kids, particularly model clay, it's got lots of more so than just Play-Doh, but where they can
you
play,
have to manipulate it more.
model.
Yeah.
And then sand trays that kids can work with. And I had a rice bin. I haven't used it this year, but it gets pretty messy. But more than anything, kids love the rice bin. This big rice bin is just full of rice, and it has different objects in it. And they can come and scoop up the rice and pour it down, scoop it up. Kids like that, scooping it up and pouring it and watching it fall and listening to the noise, feeling it on their hands, type of a thing. So some of those different strategies. But just to summarize then, preventative type things, the curriculum piece that you're working with them on. And then with that curriculum piece, when they're dysregulated, then you want to bring in that curriculum piece. What zone are you in? What do you need to get to the green zone? How can I help? That kind of thing.
Any of you who have not taken Education 131 guiding behavior, it is offered spring quarter, and we do learn about the zones of regulation in that class. It's a really fun class. And that is one of the major challenges that new teachers face is guiding behavior. So that is an important class.
Yeah.
Micah says, I know it's been a while since you've been up at Western, but he's just wondering, how did you feel about Western's program as far as studying special education? Did you feel well prepared? Do you feel like it was a good program? Have you heard anything about the program since?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know. I suppose it's definitely different. I didn't necessarily feel well prepared. I felt prepared enough to begin, but I think most of the learning eventually came from just hopping in, and because there's different different districts do things different ways. They have different materials that you use. And, Western probably can't just cover all of that. And I think back then too, there wasn't a lot around social emotional learning, SEL. And I don't know how much is there now, but that again, that's the significant piece that my recommendation would be as much social emotional learning that you can get under your belt. That's going to be pretty critical unless things change, but I see them continuing to ramp up. So yeah, and the other thing would be any practicum you can get involved in. I think that's where the learning really is going to happen. And then what I find is that my master's program I thought was much better. And I think part of that was I was already teaching in special education. And then I had a feel for what it was like. And then I took my master's in special education, and I was able to apply, I knew this fits with what I'm doing here. So.
Yeah, that's so true.
But I think Western has a good education program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Naomi says, is there a particular topic that you like and dislike teaching to kids?
Yeah, I love teaching reading a lot. Yeah, this year I'm teaching a lot of behavior instead. But yeah, I would say reading, and just I figured out a lot of different ways to go about that, and love to see kids move from can't read anything, you don't even know the sounds of letters or the names of letters, and to being able to read. It's a pretty enjoyable process to watch, and to see kids when they start to pick it up. They're feeling pretty good.
If some of you are noticing I'm not reading your question, I think it's because I feel like he's already addressed it, but I don't want you to worry that like I'm not counting your question, okay? Kian, I'll make sure you get Bob's contact information. Kian's definitely interested in doing some work at Happy Valley. Kara says, I think you've already answered this as far as social emotional curriculum you use, because you talked about zones of regulation, and then you also talked about everyday speech.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Yeah. There's one other one that we took. It's called Superflex.
Oh, I've never heard of Superflex.
Yeah, Superflex is and this is for younger students for the most part, although there's some older students who could maybe get into it. But it's about this imaginary city. And in this imaginary city, there are the unthinkables. And the unthinkables are people like Glass Man and Mean Gene. And the unthinkables are trying to destroy this city. They're trying to ruin it. And then there is Superflex and his dog, and they come to the rescue to defeat the unthinkables. And so, for example, Glass Man has big upset reactions to small problems. And so it's just a whole series of materials that that we can work through that help kids kind of understand, I had a big upset reaction to a small problem, and then different strategies they can use to regulate themselves during that time.
That's good. Connor has a question that I think so often people don't think about. And this is awesome that Connor's thinking about this. Where did you get the resources you use in your classroom? Did the school provide them, or did you need to do your own homework to find what you would need? And I guess, I kind of would even go with not only the curriculum you use, but even like the items in your classroom, like when you talked about the sand and the rice and the weighted blankets and all of that. Are these things that the school provides, or are you sometimes spending your own money to get these things?
Yeah, both. And I think there's a few things too to help out. So the district will provide certain things, and you can request certain things. You might get denied, which I have sometimes. So you get, supposedly the core materials to work with. And then secondly, the district, at least in Bellingham, gives us a certain amount of money, like $340 or something like that, $400, where we can spend at our discretion to buy materials. And then our PTA, they, and I don't know if this is true at Tammy's school, but our PTA gives us like a grant of, I think I get 300 and something dollars as well. Where, yeah, there you go, Tammy. One schoolhouse, right? And so we're able, our PTA has been doing that ever since I've been there. So they just say, hey, here's some money, just give us the receipts and we'll give you the money back. So, you know, so that's $600. And then in addition to that, sometimes I'll spend some of my own money to get some of the materials, but the core materials are provided by the district. And then we have an occupational therapy department, and they, you know, will probably provide like the weighted blankets, and we have weighted vests and different sensory tools for kids.
Your motor room, it would be awesome if tomorrow you could snap a picture of that and text that to me, and then I'll share it with the students because people are very intrigued by that and wanting
Oh,
to
okay,
know what
yeah.
does that look like.
And it's not my motor room, it's the school's motor room, and it's,
Yes.
so it's shared, yeah.
Yes.
And then Roxanne, could you just send an email to my school email address?
Mm-hmm.
That way it'll show up there and I'll remember to do that.
Yes. Yep. You bet. Let's see. Okay, I think we'll end with, and this is a question to where I think you're going to say there isn't one, but what does a typical day look like on your job, or is there no typical day?
Yeah. Well, there's supposed to be a typical day. I'm still waiting for that typical day this year. It's starting to happen. Yeah, usually start in the morning and check in on a few kids who, again, have some of those social emotional issues. Develop a schedule for one particular kid who we're trying to get in the classroom more often. And then we'll start with some reading groups with some kids. Then I will go into some classrooms and check on a few kids, have some more groups that I pull out, like some reading groups. And then I kind of go up into the fourth grade wing and I work with kids outside of their classroom. We have a common area. Each grade level has a common area. And so I can pop into there. And so we work on a math group pulling from a few different classes. It's just right outside their class rather than coming to the resource room. And so kind of that, you know, pulling out some groups and then going into classrooms. And then this year, so trying to make all that happen through the day, I'll get a text that says, you know, so-and-so is left campus, need your help to go get them, or so-and-so is pushing over desks in the classroom, come help. So that's happened a bunch this year, and starting to slow down a little bit. And we've got some things in place for some of those kids who are doing that a lot, but it's taken quite a while to get some more support for those kids. And then at the end of the day, will either be meetings or trying to plan and write IEPs. But unfortunately, I get very little time to actually plan instruction, because most of it's taken up with meetings or IEP work. Yeah, and my heart and desire would be to have some quality time for planning instruction, and that just hasn't happened this year. How about you, Tammy? I'm curious to see if you get much time for that.
No, well, mine's a whole different program because I'm preschool, but right. But this is a side conversation here, Bob. Tomorrow, I think, have you seen Spencer Koch subbing at your building?
Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah, he's coming tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, that's my son.
Yeah, well, I'm going to see him a lot, actually. Yeah.
Well, awesome. That's so great. Well, Bob, I just want to thank you so much. And I know that everybody is joining in on that with just you taking some time out tonight away from your cookies and and sharing with us. And you're more than welcome to stay on. But I think that you had something else planned. So feel free to log off. And I'll be, I've got 2 students already that want to get information on volunteering, and And then I'll send you the email to remind you that we'd love some pictures of the motor room.
Sounds good.
So,
I'll stay for about another 10 minutes, then I've got to run, but nice to meet you all. And thanks for letting me come and share. Thanks so much.
thank you. So I want to introduce Tammy Koch. Tammy has degrees in P3 early childhood, K through 8 general education, and also K through 12 special education. Get this, this does not seem possible, Tammy, but Tammy's been teaching 37 years. She's been teaching in special education. She did 4 years at a private school, 16 years in K5 resource room at Happy Valley, where Bob is now, and 17 years special education preschool, ages 3 through 5-year-olds at Silver Beach in Geneva. So that's what she does now. So she's kind of bringing in the early childhood focus. So it's really neat that we've got 2 special educators, but each kind of having some different expertise. So Tammy, thank you so much for coming in tonight. And let's see, I'm sure we're going to have some new questions come in now. But while we're waiting for that, I'm wondering if maybe if there were some things that you were listening to Bob share that you were thinking, oh, I want to add something there. So maybe start with that.
Well, I was thinking about the challenges. That was such a good question. Many of us have paraprofessionals or teaching assistants in our classroom, and you're not taught how to be their boss or how to even run a room with other people. So that was a big learning curve for myself because of their personalities, and they come to you with different backgrounds. And some of them, it's just a job, and others it's a career. So it really does make a difference. And then something that Bob was touching about is the scheduling, like he has to work with a lot of general ed teachers, but in my program, all my kids are pretty severe. And so they have fine motor, gross motor, sometimes vision, health with nurses with feeding tubes, adaptive, social, emotional, and then cognitive. And when they go to kindergarten, we have to reevaluate for academics. So it's working and scheduling around a lot of specialists. So you just really need to be able to work with other adults. And that can be challenging.
Yeah, because everybody kind of has their priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It can be tough. The other challenging part is the parents, and you touched on that really nicely, Bob, because for my program, I am often the first person to tell parents that their child is developmentally delayed, or I will have, kids might come in with a couple of things, but then as I work with them, I realize that they're on the spectrum. And then I have to have these meetings with these parents about, if they were my child, I'd go do this, this, and this. And it's a lot of grieving, a lot of intense information. You're telling these parents that their prince or princess is not what they thought they were going to have. And every time you meet with them, they're grieving. And so that's real difficult at times.
Yeah, I imagine that some of them are also in denial.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We one of our assignments, we read the essay, which I'm sure you've read before, Welcome to Holland by Kingsley. And it's a very simple way of explaining what that experience is like for a parent, but I really do love that essay. We also read a criticism of the essay too, because
one of my biggest learning experiences, and it was when I was first started out teaching, and I had a child that had fetal alcohol, and I was really angry that the parents did that to this child. And the mom came to me one day, and we were talking, and I wasn't sharing that obviously, but she said, every day I wake up and look at my child and feel guilt. And so you need to remember that. I mean, even parents that have kids with syndromes, they feel like they caused it. And so the guilt with the parents is so intense. And if they didn't like school, or if school was hard for them, and then they have a special needs child, that you get services from 3 years old until 21. And oftentimes before 3, you have people going into your home telling you how to do things with their kids. It can be really difficult for those private families.
Yeah, it's really true. Yeah, one family that I worked with once, their son had Down syndrome, and the mom was sharing with me how guilty she felt that she didn't volunteer in her son's classroom as she did her other children. But she said it was too hard for her to see what other children that age are doing, and to see that her son wasn't able to do the same things. And she just said emotionally that was too hard for her. And, and I gave her permission and said, that's okay. And you're meeting your child's needs in other ways. And, that's not the only way to do it, by volunteering.
Well, and for most parents, the beginning of a school year is very exciting, and they, oh, who's your kindergarten teacher? Who's your first? They rarely say, who's your special ed teacher? Because, that's a stigma. And so every year when you have an IEP, or every 3 year when you have a reevaluation, you're just throwing more and more grief that, once again, my child isn't what others are. So.
Mhm. Carol has a great question. Carol says, when you're working with children that have some social emotional challenges, how do you stay out of the power play for control? Because that's such a great question, Carol, because it is so tempting to just want to play that power game, but that tends to just create even more problems. So how do you stay out of getting into that power struggle?
Well, I'm going to win. So no, what you do is you give them choices, and the 2 choices are both things that you want. And then you let them think that they have the power, and really you have the power because you're giving them 2 choices.
Yeah.
You cut out there, Rock. Can't hear you.
Oh my.
Or is
Okay. Are you able to hear me now?
yes.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but for a moment it was saying I was going to have to restart. I'm like, no. So I'm hoping that it's going to hold out here. Let's see. Oh, Diana also wants to volunteer at Happy Valley. Now we just got to get people convinced to volunteer with you, though it might be tricky with those little ones. Let's see. Okay, Connor has a question. And again, Connor is very practical, because before Connor was asking about the money items in the classroom, and now he's asking about time. How much time, if any, do you have to set aside each night or weekend to work on tasks related to your job?
Well, tonight from 4 o'clock, since I've been home until I zoomed on, I've been working on IEPs. So, I've been doing this a long time, and that's one thing that is shocking to me. The newer teachers tend to leave at 3 o'clock without anything in their hands, and I don't know how you do that, because I don't know how to do that. I work every weekend, and it's not because I don't use my time wisely. It's just like Bob said, the amount of paperwork cannot be done within the school day.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have planning time. So in preschool, you have 2 different sessions. I have a class that starts at 8 in the morning and goes until 10:45. And they're usually the younger kids. And then I have another group that comes in at 11:15 until 2:30. And within the Bellingham School District, with our contract, you're not supposed to do bus duties. You're not supposed to do this and that. Well, I don't get PE, and I don't get music. And I put kids on the bus because I have to put them in car seats, and I have to take them out of car seats. And so Thursdays we don't have kids so that we can plan, supposedly, but those are all meeting days. So the paperwork is done on your own time.
Wow. Yeah, after 37 years. So yeah. Sarah wants to know, what is your favorite age group to work with?
Oh, you know, I typically have, I like kids that have challenging behaviors. I tend to get along with them quite well. And that's one great thing about working within a school. Like, I have some fourth grade boys that I never worked with directly, but I know that have some difficulties and they don't have a lot of positive experience. So they come into my room and they help me with the little kids and they walk them to the bus with me and they go to library with them and help them pick a book out. And it's just so awesome to see that relationship, and they're so kind. So I tend to like those tough kids.
Well, what a neat way to bring out the tender side of them and the leadership as well. Emily's wondering, how many teachers do you have in your classroom? You mentioned that you work with different specialists. Maybe you want to even kind of reiterate all the different specialists, but then also how many teachers are there in your room, and
so
para educators too?
So I'm the teacher, and then there's two paras, and then throughout the week, a speech teacher will come and work in the classroom, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a vision specialist, a audiology, because I have deaf and hard of hearing kids also. So it just depends on the student. I have had some with a full-time nurse because they're, physically they're blind, deaf, and can't move. So they have a nurse to pick them up and do their feeding tube and things. So it just depends on the student.
Wow. Naomi is wondering, what has kept you dedicated to this line of work for so long? What inspires you and motivates you?
Well, it's funny because Bob said patience was a characteristic, and I am not a patient person. And so I always laugh when people say, "Oh, you must be so patient." No, I just love these kids, and somebody needs to believe in them. And when I was a resource room teacher, I got to see some great kids do some great things, and I saw some real sad stories too. But there's a few that graduated and became teachers and came back and saw me and said, "It's because of you," and I just love it. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Wow.
And after 37 years, what else would you do?
Yeah, it would be pretty sad to have a job that long that you don't love, right?
Yeah. And I never say I'm going to work. It's interesting. I always say I'm going to school, and like I shared, my son is just finished student teaching, and he's been subbing all over the district. And I never would have thought he would be a teacher. I thought my daughter would be. So, and he's a natural. You watch him, he's a natural. And so people who have that desire to be a teacher, it. I knew it in third grade that I wanted to be a special ed teacher. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Michael wants to know if you could give some advice to a para-educator who has not had any experience in special education, what would it be?
It can be very, very scary. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is that kids with challenges can be scary because it's, we don't know what to do. So go in with an open mind, ask questions at appropriate time. Don't question the person who's making those choices in front of other people. Talk to them in private. Don't do it as a challenge, but do it more as, I noticed, what was your thinking behind it? Because you might not know the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
When I worked at Silver Beach, we were right next to a co-op, and I would do a lot of work with the co-op. And I had a student that was very severe and did a lot of self-harming. And the parent this little boy would pull his ears so hard that they would be like hanging off. And so when he was in that state, the parents had said, you need to put him in the car seat and hold his hands. And so I'm doing that. And the parent at the co-op sees it and goes to the district office and says that I'm restraining a student, which in their eyes I was. And I'm really glad they did that, because we need people to watch out for our kids, but they didn't know the whole story. And so you need to not judge, you need to get the whole story.
That's so true. That's so true. That's a great example.
By the way, he's doing great. He's in high school now.
Yay. I love that. Sarah says, did the pandemic make it harder to have those relationships with the parents and communicating with them?
Well, when we started the pandemic, it was March 13th. We were told to go home, and you couldn't get back in your classroom. We preschools had to make videos daily of some kind of activity that the parents could watch with their child. And so that was really difficult to come up with those kinds of things. When we started in the fall, we were remote, and I had to have all materials delivered to the kids because I do cutting. I don't cut the stuff. I want the kids to learn to cut. So I had to have all the cut scissors, all the glue, everything, plus all the pre-made materials delivered to all my families. And then I had to set up times where the families could log in. So each family had to have individual time, and I would basically teach them how to work with their child who was sitting. Now you can imagine that was really challenging. And it was beyond crazy, but the parents, they came, they showed up. They might not be able to do the things, but I was able to help them. And then they would ask me for things like if they had a nonverbal child and they need pictures for this, and this, and I had to make it that day and get it to their house. And
wow,
it was intense.
Yeah, I bet you're so
trying
glad.
trying to keep a mask on a 3-year-old who has sensory issues. And yeah, it's been a long couple of years. And like Bob said, the kids are my kids that are 3, they've never seen people without a mask. They've never been to a park. The parents have been with them. The parents are exhausted, especially if you have a high child with high impact. I'm respite for these families. I give them 3 hours a day to just do whatever. And yeah, it's been tough.
Wow. Yeah. The long-term effects we're going to see from this is really.
I think there's going to be a lot of teacher burnout too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a lot of job openings. So if you're serious about being in education, get your degree.
Yeah, so true. Nick has a great question. What is the process for when a new student arrives?
Well, see, the great thing about preschool is that there's different ways of coming in. Several kids may already be on the birth to 3 support. And then by law, before their 3rd birthday, they have to be reevaluated and be in program with an IEP. So in the last month, I've received 4 new students.
Wow.
And I continue to get them every week, more and more, and there's no cutoff. So in my classroom, I have, at one time, right now I have only 10, which seems really small at one session, but that's 20 total with the kids needing support in all areas. And you have to teach them reading, math, pre-writing, adaptive social, fine motor, gross motor, toileting, feeding, sitting, taking their coats on, off, all those things. And it's a very short amount of time. On top of that, I have typical peers that pay tuition. So with my special needs kids, I have some typical peers that are tuition based. And I'm the only school in Bellingham that does that in preschool.
Wow. That's really wonderful.
It is great. They're, but uh, yeah, yeah.
It has its
So,
challenges.
yeah,
I'm sure.
so kids are always coming and they start at 3, and it's a new, I just got a new little girl who's 3, and you forget how little they are because her class is now almost 4, right? And so her little fingers, she's just little, you forget. So.
Brianne, you may have kind of already addressed this, Tammy, but Brianne says, what do you feel is the most difficult aspect of your work with your job?
It's that paperwork. And like Bob said, when we started, when we started, Bob and I started around the same time. I think he's behind me a couple of years, but our IEPs were on 3 pieces of paper that were duplicate, and you had to write it. And then the pink one went to the family, the yellow one went to the district office, and you kept the white one. Now it's all on the computer, but having these meetings, like I have a meeting for a student that I have to coordinate. The mom and dad both work. I have the occupational therapy, the physical therapy, the vision specialist, a school nurse, her receiving school teacher, and myself. Did I say speech teacher? I have to get a time and a date, and this is going to be like a 2.5-hour meeting. So it's after school, and I have to coordinate all that with everyone. That's tough.
Wow.
If you do high school, you have a secretary. Elementary, you don't. So go high school.
Okay. Well, Connor, there you go. Connor's thinking of doing that. Emily was following up with what we talked about earlier with parents feeling guilty. And she says, what would be your advice for parents that do feel that guilt?
Well, you just have to listen. I go beyond because I know that these parents are first timers. And so I will do things that they know that they can trust me. For example, I had a little boy that had never been out of his parents' care, and he is a child with autism. And so during the summer of August, I went on my own 2 days a week and played with him in his yard so that he would come to school and not cry. Most people don't do that. I felt it was necessary because I wanted these parents to work with me as a team player and know that I really do care. And so I go, beyond and do things like that so that parents will trust me and know that what they share with me is confidential, and that I might not have their child, but I understand their struggles, and I send out supports, and if, you need some community support, you need some mental health supports, I just have a lot of information available for those families.
Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, I mean, because you're working with families then potentially for 2 or 3 years.
Correct.
Yeah. So those relationships, I mean,
Oh,
it's always important, but especially when you're not going to be with a family for just 1 year.
correct.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge. And that was a challenge when I was a K-5 resource room teacher, because you know what? I know, I say between the hours of 8 and 3, I don't get paid to not like your kid. But the truth is, there are some kids that are just not, you're not as fond of them. And, I make it every day to like that kid more and more. That's my goal. But if you have a family and you start with them in kindergarten and you go all the way to 5th grade and you don't get along with that family, that's a long 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Really true.
And you can't please everyone. That's the other thing, being a teacher, you can be told positive things over and over, but that one negative will send you into your bed crying for days. And it's really hard. So you just have to know that you can't please everyone. You can only do your very best. And some people are going to like you and some people aren't.
Yeah, that's really true. Carly's wondering, how do you work with parents that do not want to accept or work with their children that that have special needs in your classroom? So like if they are just really reluctant, or you know, again, they may have some reasons like what Bob talked about. Sometimes a lack of skills themselves, or sometimes they're working 3 jobs or whatever. But how do you work with parents who maybe you don't feel like really are truly being your partners?
It's tough. And so what you need to do is you just focus on the kid. And I had a mom last year that was like that, and she was limited in a lot of things. So I would take, we had every Thursday food box distributed within the school district, but I would take it to her house and just put it on her door, and I would put a note for her son. And, you know, that helped, just little things, you know, but I knew she wasn't going to support in the distant learning or have the iPad charged or anything like that. So I just keep that contact with the kids mostly.
Yeah. Do you ever use like an adult in the building to where like that person becomes like a caring adult for that child? So maybe that, like
absolutely.
if that child had a behavior plan that needed to get signed by a parent, maybe instead they go to this other adult in the building to do it.
You know, my kids, their age doesn't really, they don't have a behavioral plan. I mean, we have issues. I get hit, like yesterday, I got hit so hard by a kid that stands up to my chest that my glasses flew across the room. I mean, it was hard. And, but we do have other teachers that come in and acknowledge our kids and will read to them. And it's more just friends that, you know, people I work with that are willing to do that, because you can't get that in every building because everyone's busy. But that's why I do the 4th grade boys and the 5th grade boys. I'm that parent for them.
Right, right. Yeah. So, yeah.
And many of my kids don't go to Geneva at kindergarten, because I serve kids that go to Carl Kosher, Roosevelt, all over. So we don't, you know, you don't want to get those relationships if they're not going to be there the next year.
Kara is wondering, what do you think about children who hoard toys and materials? Is this possibly a sign of trauma?
It could be. I mean, there's lots of reasons for hoarding. They might not have the things at home, or they might feel like that they don't have choices. I wouldn't, if I had a kid that was just hoarding, I wouldn't jump to trauma right away. I would look for other clues. And some kids just like always having a special toy in their hand. I mean, that's just a really common thing. And they're 3 years old when they come, you know, I mean, they have their little blankies and their binkies, and, you know, mean old teacher Tammy tells them to keep them in their backpack. And
Carrie Ann wants to know, do you feel like there are big differences in availability of resources? Like if you compare a preschool setting with an elementary setting with a secondary setting, like, do you feel like all are pretty equal with their funding and their resources? Or do you feel like there's some differences? Like you just mentioned, for example, that a high school special ed teacher has a secretary. And so, yeah, share your thoughts there.
In Bellingham, right now, we currently have 8 preschools with special needs kids. 2 of the school sites are combined Title I schools. Geneva is not a Title I, so we don't have as much funding. So it depends on what school you work at. However, Bellingham is really strong with their early childhood initiatives. And I don't know if you've heard of Promise K, but Bellingham, have you guys talked about that at all?
We have not.
So Promise K is something that our assistant superintendent started about I think 5 years ago, and it starts every year in January, and it's for those kids that are not in a program or a daycare. So we're not taking monies from Head Start or the Opportunity Council. And they start a program through the state. They can do it because it's Promise K, and they get money. And so 4.5-year-olds who haven't been in school or in a daycare come. So most of our schools now have that, and the laws are changing, and they're supposed to next year, all kids with special needs have to be offered a full-time program, or their disabilities have to be supported within their daycares by public school people. And it's real iffy right now. And there is some talk of full year Promise K with special ed, because right now, if you're an IEP kid, you don't get a full program. And you can't go into Promise K because you already have a quality program. So I've been kind of fighting, saying, isn't that reverse discrimination? So I think next year there's going to be some big changes in Bellingham.
Wow, that's exciting. So there you are, being their advocate. And so
Oh,
that's
well,
great.
Until it happens, right?
Yeah. Kian, he wants to know, do you find that it's more difficult to identify whether a student needs services and what services they need at a certain age? So for example, is it harder to recognize that, like with such young children that you work with, and how are the kids getting identified, and how does that happen?
Well, sometimes if they're born with something, then they're right. If you, at birth, if you are identified as having a developmental delay or a syndrome or a health, you get put into this birth to 3 category, and people follow you. At 3, you either can decline an evaluation or go forward with an evaluation. We also do child finds. We didn't do one this year, but twice a year, anybody can come in for a free screening if they think that their child is delayed in any area. Doctors will look at your child and say, boy, they should be talking, you should call your school district, because every school district by law has to have an evaluation team for kids starting at 3. And with, I know this sounds weird, but I can go to the grocery store and point out kids that need help. So, so when a kid comes in and the parents say it's only communication, and they're walking on their toes and flapping their hands and watching this spinning around and around, it's more than communication. You just can't say anything. You can just say, hey, do they dress themselves? Do they feed themselves? How are they sleeping? And you do a lot of asking questions.
How do you deal with kids that, well, like the kid that pushed you, or a kid throwing a chair, or those kinds of things that are dangerous for other kids? So how do you deal with that?
Well, you just have to keep the other kids safe. And luckily there's restraining laws, but these are 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. And whatever I would do with a typical kid is what I'm going to do. So if someone is hitting me, I'm going to hug them, and I'm going to hug them to stop the hitting, but it's developmentally appropriate. I'm not restraining them. Now, I've had to restrain some kids, and you just sit on the floor, and I've had the training, and I have to have the training every year, and I sit on the floor and I do that body hold, or I call the office for help. But usually I try to just take care of it in my classroom. And we have the thinking chair, which is used throughout the whole school. Every room has a thinking chair or a think time. And so I just have a rocking chair in a quiet corner, and you get 2 warnings, and the third one, you're in the thinking chair, and we practice going it when we're calm, and we celebrate when people go the right way. And, you can go to the thinking chair even without being asked to go. So
I love that it's a rocking chair. That's
do you know
awesome.
what? I did that because they kept throwing the chair that I had in there, and I thought this has got to change. And so I thought a rocking chair, and ever since they've never thrown it.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like you're
Mhm.
taking one of the most special chairs and making it
Yep.
a think time. Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's see. So another question from Allison was, what about during the summer? First of all, what do you do during the summer? And then what do the students that are receiving these special services, what happens to those kids over the summer?
That's a really tough one, because we do offer a summer school program for kids that you have to document that they lose skills over like the winter break or spring break. The problem with that, the people that teach the summer school, they're not always people that have the knowledge of the skill level. And so that can sometimes be more harming to the child, because if you go for 6 weeks to a different school, it's not a preschool setting. It might be a 5th grade classroom, and you're with all these strangers. That's even harder. I always just say, spend time with your kids at home and celebrate what they can do. Go to the park. I make every summer I send home a packet of activities that they can do, from ideas of spraying water on a window and washing it, to going and collecting rocks and things like that. When COVID wasn't around, the library had weekly readings. There were always things that you could do with Lodell would have group things for parents. I also carefully give, with parent permission, try to share phone numbers so parents can have each other, but that's real tricky too. So
That's a neat idea.
yeah.
What about you? What do you do during the summer?
Well, up to about 10 years ago, I worked during the summer. I would do some kind of fun job or do summer school. But now I just enjoy my summer. I travel. Last year, I spent my summer in Arizona taking care of my sister who was ill. And prior to that, I would go to Greece for a month every summer for about 8 years.
Wow.
I just sit on the beach under the umbrella and read really horrible, easy reading novels and drink Heineken, to be honest.
Love it. Love it. Micah is wondering if you're taking any volunteers.
Yeah, I do. I can't do it right now because of COVID, but I guess Monday we have a whole new set of laws coming out. So I don't know what that looks like.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so maybe in a few weeks or so, maybe. Okay. Yeah, our spring quarter begins during your spring break is when our spring quarter begins. So yeah, so that might be a good time to check that out.
Absolutely. Early childhood. I tell you what, you cannot go wrong. I always tell new teachers, even if you don't want to do special ed, take special ed classes, because it will help you within the classroom. And, get, like Bob said, get out there. Every time you have a chance to be in the classroom, go and take pictures with permission, not of the kids, but like of bulletin boards or curriculum that you see, because you won't remember. But if you have the photo, you'll have, and that's just the way of the world now, but you get a lot of good ideas that way.
Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah. Back in the day when I started teaching, I was going around with an actual camera with film in it, taking pictures of other people's classrooms and getting them developed. But I still refer to that little photo book sometimes.
And well, and it was so funny because Bob was saying, oh, curriculum, the district. And yes, but when I was hired in Bellingham, I went to the room that he was talking about that we shared, room 7 at Happy Valley, and there was one box. And the principal said, there you go. And I'm like, brand new. And I'm like, what is this? And luckily I had a student where I student taught, she was incredible. And I just went to her room and started copying math pages and drill sheets and wrote down the curriculum. And I just, yeah. So scrounge, always, if you're working in someone's room and you really like something, ask if you can have one copy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true, so true. Well, I'd like to end tonight with the students verbally sharing with you kind of what they're taking away from tonight.
And I'd like to know where you are in your education, if this is just a class that you're interested in, or if you're really, there's some of us that are spedders through and through, and there's not too many of us around. So
if you guys want to just raise your hand, then I'll call on you and you can just kind of share with Tammy what you're taking away from tonight. And she'd love to kind of hear like what your career aspirations are. And some of you are currently working in schools. Connor.
Thank you for sharing, Tammy. I'm getting a lot of good information about what it's like being a special ed teacher. And there's just a lot of like little unique details that I think you kind of have to like learn when you're considering going into this. So I find that quite useful. This is my second education class. So I'm kind of like just starting the journey. I'm actually doing Compass to Campus next term. So I'm kind of hoping to get a little bit more experience since I haven't had any since high school. But yeah, thank you for sharing all these details. It's good to start learning.
Great. Okay, Kara.
Yeah, I am taking this class and one more, my internship at Wacom. I'm getting my ECE credentials. I'm currently a lead teacher in the Blaine ECAP program that is next door to the developmental preschool. So and then my son used to go to see Debbie Anderson. I don't know if you remember her. She taught a long time ago. So I'm fairly, I know a lot about, special needs children, and it's really important to me, to hear your side of everything. And I hope to be teaching as long as you. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. I promised tonight would be informational and inspirational, and I think that is definitely true. Okay, yes, Naomi.
So working?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm taking ECE so that I can open up a art center for foster kids or troubled youth.
Oh.
And I'm taking away from this the inspiration for sticking with those kids who can be a little troubling at times. I know I used to struggle a lot with one particular child with developmental issues, and it was really challenging for me to the point where I could not work in the same classroom and I had to be switched to a different one. So it's kind of inspirational for me, as that was a challenge I had in the past.
Yeah, I've learned if there's a kid you don't like, spend more time with them. Make it your mission to like them, and they'll be one of your favorite kids forever.
Great advice. Okay, I want to really honor our time, so I'm just going to take two more people's comments. Who else would like to share with Tammy what they're taking away? Brianne?
Hi, Tammy, thank you so much for all the work that you do. You really are an inspiration to, at least to me as an educator. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to hear all the dedication and time you've put into this industry. And, we don't get the recognition that we deserve for all the hard work we put in. I'm an assistant teacher, have led my own classroom for many years. This is my final quarter at Wacom. And I work in a preschool setting, but not a special ed preschool setting. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it's been great hearing your view on it, what you go through daily, the struggles that you have. It's nice to know that other preschool centers also have similar struggles, even though you're more focused on special needs children. And I just really appreciate all the hard work you put in.
Well, I appreciate what you do too. We're going to have, hopefully we'll have dual programs in all our schools one day.
Fingers crossed. I loved when you said that. I was like, yes, please, let's do this.
That's awesome. Let's have one more person share. I know that all of you want to, but I want to make sure that you guys are able to.
Yeah, you guys, this is my bedtime.
Let's have one more person. Okay, Audrey.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I am trying to decide. So my mom actually is a para substitute in the special needs classroom. So she comes home and like shares her experiences that she has with her kiddos and her friends. And she absolutely just adores. That's one of the reasons why I asked Bob. Like, I was like, what differences do you see in like teachers that work with special needs compared to like just the general like teacher? I mean, I know both are very important, but like, and so I guess, and I know I want to work with kids. I just haven't decided like where yet. So that's why I was like, I'm in that deciding factor as far as like my education. I'm like, where do I want to go with myself? So that's why I like talking with like people who are in the classrooms are very important to me right now, because I have had some experience in the classroom just observing, but not really serving the kids yet like you guys do. So it's like very important for me to have this feedback from you guys. So thank you.
Well, you know, that's a good thing. If you are looking for employment, it wouldn't hurt to go to your local school districts and sign up for subbing for paras, because you could see a whole bunch of stuff.
I know it's a lame excuse, but my work, my actual job is like 8 to 4. So it's like Monday through Friday. So it's like before I was like a full-time employee, I was able to get in those classrooms, but now it's just like.
Absolutely, and you have to work.
Yeah.
It's a lame excuse, but yeah.
It's not an excuse.
No, it's not. It's not. But you know, at some point when you know, if things change, you'll know that that's available.
Or volunteer at the YMCA or other, you know, Gabriel Arts Kids. I don't know if you guys have heard of that place, but that's great. Or Bay, it's singing preschool and, you know, arts, performance arts. Just get out there and volunteer.
Yeah, there's a lot of evening and weekend kinds of things too. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for sticking around an extra 5 minutes. And Tammy, again, thank you. Boy, what a day you have put in. And now you got to get to bed and get up again tomorrow. And so we super appreciate that. And students, I'm working on getting all those quizzes done. And so those will be posted no later than tomorrow. But all of the research papers are posted if you wanted to get reading those, but you have until the 25th to work on that. So, and I'll post a few other updates as well, but all right. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Good luck, you guys. Bye-bye.
Good night.